Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the State Water Board's Curtailment, Compliance, and Response Assistant webinar for the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Watershed Emergency Regulation. My name is Jenna Guzman, and I'm an environmental scientist at the State Water Board's Office of Public Participation, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. So today, next slide, please. So today, staff in the Division of Water Rights will present an overview of the recent curtailment and reporting orders issued pursuant to the State Water Board's recently adopted emergency regulation in the Delta Watershed and provide guidance to water rights holders, claimants who are responsible for complying with the requirements of those orders. This webinar will be split into two sessions. This morning session, scheduled from now until noon, will include an overview of the Delta Watershed Emergency Regulation, reporting requirements applicable to all water rights holders and claimants in the Delta Watershed. The afternoon session scheduled later today from 1 to 4 p.m. will address enhanced water diversion and demand reporting requirements for larger diverters whose diversions are over 5,000 acre-feet or greater annually. During this afternoon session, staff will present an overview of those enhanced reporting requirements and provide guidance on how to submit the required information. Although the afternoon session is targeted for the smaller group of larger diverters, other interested persons may attend both sessions. Next slide, please. So before we get started, we like to go over some logistics. First, this webinar is being recorded, including its chat, and the video recording
in progress
posted on the Delta Drought and Curtailment webpage within the next couple of days. This webinar is also being webcast on the Cal EPA website at video.calepa.ca.gov, which is video.calepa.ca.gov. And we request that if you intend on only watching and do not plan on asking questions, to please use the webcast. The morning and afternoon webinar sessions will consist of two parts. First, we have the staff presentation, and the second is the question and answer session. And if you're joining by Zoom, you can enter in your questions into the chat at any time during the staff presentation, and we will do our best to answer them when we get to the Q&A session. The chat box is found in your taskbar, which is located at the bottom of your screen. And if you're calling in or joining by webcast, you can email your questions to our email box, which is bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov. So that's bay, B as in boy, AY-delta@waterboards with an S.ca.gov as in Victor. And we kindly ask that you use the subject line 831 webinar question. We recognize that you may have questions that are specific to your circumstance, and we kindly ask that you email any of those questions to that baydelta@waterboards.ca.gov email, rather than including them in the chat during this webinar. Our goal is to answer questions that are applicable to multiple water rights holders, and we also want to better understand and more accurately respond to those more specific questions through one-on-one communication. And lastly, if you have any additional questions or would like to follow up with a staff member after the webinar, you can email us again at that bay-delta or bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov, or you can give us a call at 916-319-0960. So now I'll be turning over the presentation to Diane Riddle.
Thank you, Jenna. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. My name again is Diane Riddle. I'm one of the Assistant Deputy Directors in the Division of Water Rights with the State Water Board. The purpose of this webinar is to provide an overview of current curtailment and reporting orders issued in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Watershed, and to provide guidance to diverters who are responsible for curtailing diversions, submitting certification forms indicating compliance with the orders, and other reporting requirements. As shown on the slide, we will provide an overview of the emergency curtailment and reporting regulation that was adopted by the State Water Board on August 3rd that provides the basis for the curtailment and reporting orders that were issued on August 20th. The curtailment and reporting requirements included in the August 20th orders are new and separate from prior curtailments issued under Standard Water Right Term 91 and notices of water unavailability issued earlier this year. Please be aware that some water rights may be subject to two different curtailment orders at the same time and must comply with the most stringent applicable curtailment order. In addition, forms that you may have submitted under these other processes are different from those required under the August 20th orders. The forms required by the August 20th orders must be submitted regardless of whether you have provided similar information in other forms earlier this year. We will summarize these curtailment and reporting requirements included in the orders and how these differ from other curtailment and reporting requirements and information provided regarding water unavailability. Next, we will demonstrate how to check if a water right or claim is curtailed under the August 20th orders using the curtailment status list posted on our webpage. We will cover the compliance certification requirements and demonstrate how to fill out the required form. We will also summarize the possible exceptions to curtailments and how to request or obtain those exceptions. Finally, staff will answer questions from participants. We ask that you please hold any questions regarding enhanced reporting until the afternoon session of this webinar. Before we get started, I wanted to thank those of you who are listening in and asking questions today, and those who've reached out via email or phone line to understand their obligations under the curtailment and reporting orders. We appreciate your attention and plan to assist water users as much as we can with compliance issues. Next slide, please. Briefly, before we get into the substance of the curtailment reporting orders and associated regulation, I wanted to provide some context for the State Water Board's responsibilities and authorities. Issues related to water unavailability are part of the State Water Board's core responsibilities to administer the water right priority system in the state, as well as to provide for the reasonable protection of beneficial uses of water to the fullest extent possible. The State Water Board is also responsible for protection of water quality and critical drinking water supplies. These issues are all central to issues related to the current curtailment and reporting requirements. Administering water right priorities is most critical during times of shortage to ensure that limited supplies are diverted in conformance with water right priorities. Because senior water right holders may be located downstream of junior water right holders, it is not always clear to users when supplies are not available at their priority of right. Similarly, it can be unclear when previously stored water is being released for a downstream purpose and as such is unavailable for diversion by other users. These storage supplies can represent water needed for salinity control in the Delta, critical to maintaining diversions for drinking water and other purposes within the Delta, the Bay Area, the Central Valley, and Southern California now and in the future. It is important to protect these previously released storage supplies so that storage supplies are not depleted and water is available for critical functions until wet conditions return. The curtailment and reporting requirements that we will talk about in this presentation are all aimed at achieving these purposes. With that, I will now turn the presentation over to Rob McCarthy, who will provide an overview of hydrologic conditions and the emergency regulation.
Thanks, Diane. My name is Robert McCarthy, and I'm an environmental scientist with the Division of Water Rights. So before we get into the details of the curtailment and reporting orders, I'll provide some background information on how we got here today. I'll start with a brief overview of the current drought conditions that are driving the need for water diversion curtailments and additional reporting. This slide presents a brief overview of current hydrologic conditions in California. So California and the entire Western United States are facing a significant drought following one of the driest periods on record, driven by climate change and unprecedented hydrologic conditions. The Delta Watershed has experienced 2 consecutive extremely dry years. Together, water years 2020 and 2021 are expected to be the second driest 2-year period on record behind 1976-77. Earlier this year, the state also experienced unprecedented loss of snowmelt runoff, which was absorbed by dry soils or evaporated due to unusually warm temperatures before reaching streams and reservoirs. These conditions have resulted in reservoir storage levels that are significantly below average. As of August 26th, storage levels in major reservoirs, specifically Shasta, Oroville, and Folsom, were around 25% of capacity and near 40% of historical average storage conditions for that date. In response to drought conditions, Governor Newsom issued an expanded proclamation of the state of emergency on May 10th for 41 counties, including those within the Delta Watershed. The May 2021 proclamation finds that it is necessary to act expeditiously to mitigate the effects of drought conditions in the Delta Watershed, and directs the State Water Board to consider adopting an emergency regulation to curtail water diversions when water is not available at water right holders' priority of right, or to protect releases of stored water. On July 8th, 2021, the governor expanded the emergency declaration to 9 additional counties and called upon Californians to voluntarily reduce their water use by 15%. Next slide, please. So now I'll talk a little bit about the need for the emergency regulation and the associated curtailment and reporting orders. The Delta Watershed is the state's largest surface water source, supplying 2/3 of Californians with at least some portion of their drinking water. It is also home to numerous ecologically, commercially, recreationally, and culturally important fish and wildlife populations that rely on water supplies from the watershed. Water supply in many parts of California, including the Delta Watershed, are significantly limited this year, creating shortfalls for meeting many demands. The State Water Board has an obligation to ensure that water right holders and claimants who do not have water available at their priority of right and do not have a need or responsibility to provide water for minimum human health and safety cease diversions of water. That water is needed for more senior rights and to protect critical water storage for minimum health and safety needs, including water storage in reservoirs, salinity control in the Delta, and some ecosystem protection. And due to severe emergency drought conditions and the need for prompt action, the State Water Board recently adopted an emergency regulation to address the immediate and dire water shortages in the Delta Watershed. The emergency regulation enables the State Water Board to more effectively administer and enforce the water right priority system and protect critical water storage by giving the board the authority to issue curtailment orders. The emergency regulation also allows the board to require large water diverters to report past use and forecast future use in order to inform refinement of water demand estimates to better inform future curtailments. Next slide, please. Next, I'll talk a little bit about the events leading up to the curtailment and reporting orders. Prior to approval of the emergency regulation, the State Water Board undertook efforts, including opportunity for public comment, to develop a methodology to determine when water is unavailable for diversion at a water user's priority of right. Based on that methodology, on June 15th, 2021, the State Water Board issued informational notices to water users, referred to as a notice of water unavailability for post-1914 water right holders and warning of impending water unavailability for pre-1914 and riparian claimants in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Watershed. The notice was solely informational and was not an order or directive from the State Water Board to stop diverting. The notices did request that water users for whom water was unavailable to complete forms identifying if water diversions had ceased, and if not, why. These forms are different than the forms that are being discussed today that relate to curtailment orders, which will be explained further in this presentation. The June 15 notice of water unavailability advised that, based on current information, water was unavailable for post-1914 appropriative water right holders in the Delta Watershed. The notice also warned water users with more senior water right claims that additional information would be provided about unavailability under these senior claims. The June 15 notice of water unavailability also informed water right holders and claimants that development of an emergency regulation was under consideration that would have additional regulatory effect. On July 23rd, 2021, the State Water Board issued an additional notice of water unavailability for senior water right claims in the Delta Watershed, which advised diverters that water supply was insufficient to support diversions under some pre-1914 appropriative water right claims and insufficient to support full diversions by some riparian claims. The July 23rd, 2021 notice also alerted water right holders and claimants that a draft emergency curtailment and reporting regulation was available for public review and comment that, if approved, could order curtailments to occur. On July 27th, State Water Board staff held a workshop on the proposed emergency regulation to receive public input. The regulation was approved on August 3rd and became effective on August 19th, 2021. On August 20th, initial orders imposing water right curtailment and reporting requirements were issued to all water right holders and claimants in the Delta Watershed. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we get into the substance of the curtailment and reporting orders, I'll provide some background on what the emergency regulation provides for. The emergency regulation authorizes the State Water Board to issue curtailment orders requiring water right holders and claimants in the Delta Watershed to stop diverting water when it is not available under their priority of right. So this is different than the prior notices of water unavailability that were only informational. The regulation also authorizes the State Water Board to impose certain reporting requirements. This is also different than the reporting that was requested under the notices of water unavailability. The reason for the new reporting requirement is to provide for confirmation of compliance with the emergency regulation and curtailment orders that include additional provisions and have a different regulatory context than the reporting under the notices. We understand that some may not understand this difference, so we would like to point that out to ensure that all water right holders and claimants fill out the additional forms required for their water right or claim. The following slides summarize the components of the emergency regulation, including curtailment and reporting requirements and possible exceptions to curtailments. Next slide, please. Section 876.1 of the regulation provides the Deputy Director for the State Water Board's Division of Water Rights the authority to issue curtailment orders in Delta Watershed when flows are insufficient to support all demands. The regulation identifies the process the State Water Board will use for updating curtailment orders and providing notification when curtailments are required and when curtailments are temporarily suspended or reimposed. Curtailment updates will be provided at least weekly and posted to the State Water Board's drought webpage and distributed through the State Water Board's Delta Drought email list in order to provide for timely communication, including regarding suspension of curtailments. Recipients of initial orders are required to either subscribe to the State Water Board's Delta Drought email distribution list or frequently check the State Water Board's drought webpage to receive updated information regarding water diversion curtailment and reporting orders and water unavailability. Please note that weekly email updates will not be specific for each diverter. Instead, these updates will identify which groups of water rights and claims are curtailed, if any. To check if a specific right is curtailed, a water user should check the curtailment status list unless it is clear based on the description of groups of rights that are curtailed. Next slide, please. The regulation provides for the use of the water unavailability methodology for the Delta Watershed for curtailment decisions or comparable tools, which may include updates to that methodology. Real-time, publicly available, and reliable information may also be used to support temporary suspension and reimposition of curtailments resulting from precipitation and runoff events. State Water Board staff will use the best available information, such as water supply forecasts from the California Department of Water Resources and other similarly reliable sources to determine when curtailments of water diversions should be temporarily suspended. State Water Board staff will identify the specific sources used to support its curtailment decisions as part of its email and website updates on curtailments. Under the regulation, water right holders and claimants who receive an order may submit information to the Deputy Director to propose a correction to a water right priority date or provide other information relevant to the issue of whether curtailment is appropriate. If a water right holder or claimant believes an error has been made in determining the water right priority date, water right holders and claimants may submit information to support a correction to the assigned water right priority date. Water right holders and claimants may also submit information and propose that curtailment may not be appropriate for a particular diverter or in a specific stream system, as demonstrated by verifiable circumstances. such as a stream system that has been adjudicated and is disconnected from the larger watershed where curtailment would not make water available to serve downstream water rights or claims. Next slide, please. As discussed in more detail later, under Section 879D of the regulation, all water right holders and claimants issued an initial order are required to submit a certification indicating that they have and will continue to take actions needed to comply with orders issued pursuant to Section 876.1, including regularly reviewing information posted on the State Water Board's drought webpage or subscribing to the State Water Board's Delta Drought email subscription list to determine when curtailments are required and ceasing water diversions when curtailments are ordered. In addition, the regulation authorizes the State Water Board to require water right holders and claimants with a total authorized face value or recent annual reported diversion amount of 1,000 acre-feet or greater to submit monthly reporting information, including prior diversion volumes and demand projections for subsequent months. However, these requirements are currently only being imposed on diversions of 5,000 acre-feet or greater annually. This information will be used to improve the demand data set to better inform curtailments. Next slide, please. So under the emergency regulation, there are a few different types of exceptions that could allow for continued diversion of water after a curtailment order is in effect. The first group we'll cover today are non-consumptive uses. Under Section 878 of the emergency regulation, diversions described as non-consumptive would not be required to curtail in response to a curtailment order if the diversion and use of water does not decrease downstream flows. The exception could apply to direct diversions for hydropower, the right to directly divert dedicated to in-stream uses for the benefit of fish and wildlife, or other direct diversions solely for non-consumptive uses. Any diverter wishing to continue a diversion under this exception is required to submit a certification to the State Water Board by September 10th that describes a non-consumptive use and explains how the diversion and use do not decrease flows. The non-consumptive use exception to curtailments may also apply to direct diversions located within the legal delta, used exclusively to irrigate lands entirely below sea level, when comparison of diversion and drainage records provide evidence that continued irrigation of those lands does not increase net channel depletions. The board may request additional information or disapprove an exception if the information provided is insufficient or if convincing evidence contradicts the claims. Next slide, please. Under Section 878.1 of the emergency regulation, diversions of water necessary to satisfy minimum human health and safety needs may be authorized to continue after issuance of a curtailment order. Minimum human health and safety needs refers to the amount of water necessary for prevention of adverse impacts to human health and safety for which there is no feasible alternate supply. Minimum human health and safety needs include indoor domestic water uses such as human consumption, cooking, or sanitation. Other examples include water supplies necessary to meet needs identified by public agencies, such as water supplies necessary for energy sources critical to basic grid reliability, water supplies necessary to prevent tree die-off that would contribute to residential fire risk, supplies necessary to address critical air quality impacts to protect public health, supplies necessary to address immediate public health and safety needs, or other water uses necessary for human health and safety. Diversions for minimum human health and safety needs not greater than 55 gallons per person per day, where there is no feasible alternate water supply. Diversions for minimum human health and safety needs not greater than 55 gallons per person per day, where there is no feasible alternate water supply, are permitted to continue without further approval after certification of compliance with the requirements of the emergency regulation is submitted to the deputy director. If more than 55 gallons per person per day is needed for minimum human health and safety needs, the water right holder or claimant is required to submit a petition to increase diversions and must receive approval from the deputy director. For diversions for minimum human health and safety needs that cannot be quantified on the basis of an amount per person per day, the water right holder or claimant must also submit a petition and receive approval from the deputy director to continue diversions. Next slide, please. Okay, under section 878.2 of the emergency regulation, water users may propose alternative water sharing agreements or cooperative agreements among water right holders and claimants in the Delta watershed to share or forbear the use of available water and avoid curtailment. Such agreements cannot result in injury to other water right holders and claimants or cause unreasonable harm to fish and wildlife. Such agreements should achieve the overall objectives that would otherwise be served by curtailment. The Deputy Director may approve a proposed agreement subject to conditions including record keeping and reporting requirements. In considering a proposal, the Deputy Director may consult with other entities that may have technical or legal information that should be considered in evaluating a proposal, such as the California Department of Water Resources and the United States Bureau of Reclamation. The Deputy Director will also consult with the Delta Water Master on any proposals among diverters within the legal delta. An alternative water sharing agreement proposed under this section may be implemented pending review by the Deputy Director if potentially affected water right holders and claimants, including but not limited to the California Department of Water Resources and United States Bureau of Reclamation, concur with the proposal and no objections are submitted to the Deputy Director. So I'll now turn the presentation over to Riley Nolan to provide more information about the August 20 initial orders and the emergency regulations reporting requirements. Next slide, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Riley Nolan. I'm a water resource control engineer in the Division of Water Rights. Today, I will provide an overview of the initial order imposing water right curtailment and reporting requirements in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Watershed, or August 20th order for short. This order and accompanying transmittal letter were sent to all diverters in the Delta watershed on August 20th. As previously discussed, the August 20th order differs from the previous notices of water unavailability sent in June and July, which were informational notices. Unlike the notices of water unavailability, the August 20th order is an enforceable directive from the State Water Board to cease all diversions under a curtailed water right or claim. The following priorities of water rights and claims are subject to curtailment for the remainder of August. All post-1914 appropriative water rights in the Delta watershed, including the Sacramento River and San Joaquin River watersheds and the legal Delta. All pre-1914 appropriative water right claims in the San Joaquin River watershed. All pre-1914 appropriative water right claims in the Sacramento River watershed and in the legal Delta with a priority date of 1883 or later. Some pre-1914 appropriative water right claims on specific tributaries to the Sacramento River with a priority date earlier than 1883, and all riparian water right claims in the Calaveras River subwatershed that are outside of the legal Delta. The group of water rights and claims subject to curtailment in September differs from that of August due to changes in water supply and demand, including rice field drainage in the Sacramento Valley floor and decreased demands. As such, the order identifies that the following water rights and claims are curtailed in September. All post-1914 appropriative water rights in the San Joaquin River watershed, all pre-1914 appropriative water rights in the San Joaquin River watershed, all riparian water right claims in the American River watershed upstream of Folsom Reservoir, all riparian water right claims in the Calaveras subwatershed that are outside of the legal Delta, a subset of Central Valley Project and State Water Project water rights in the Sacramento River watershed and in the legal Delta, and some pre-1914 appropriative water right claims and post-1914 appropriative water right claims on specific tributaries to the Sacramento River. Importantly, the August 20th order informs diverters that future changes to curtailment status of their water right or claim will only be issued electronically. The August 20th order identifies the steps that water right holders, claimants, or their agents of record must follow to monitor the curtailment status of their water right or claim online moving forward. These steps include 1, subscribing to the Delta Drought email subscription list on the State Water Board's email subscription list webpage, or 2, frequently checking the Delta Watershed curtailment status list maintained on the Delta Drought webpage. The Delta Watershed Curtailment Status List is a dynamic tool that displays the current curtailment status of each water right or claim in the Delta Watershed. If you do not sign up for email updates that advise when this list has been updated, you should check the website before diverting and frequently thereafter. My colleague Jesse Jankowski will provide a more detailed explanation and walkthrough of the curtailment status list later in the presentation. Next slide, please. The August 20th order outlines several reporting requirements for diverters throughout the Delta Watershed needed to confirm compliance with curtailments and refine further curtailment decisions. All reporting requirements identified in the August 20th order are required to be completed and submitted online on the State Water Board's Water Rights Form and Survey Submittal Portal, or Survey Portal for short, at public.waterboards.ca.gov. The login credentials for the survey portal are included on the third page of the transmittal letter that accompanied the August 20th order. It's important to note that each water right or claim has its own login credentials. So I'll start off with the compliance certification form. So all water right holders and claimants who received the August 20th order must complete the Delta Watershed Compliance Certification Form by September 3rd, 2021. This form must be completed for each water right or claim for which an August 20th order was issued, even if the water right or claim is not currently curtailed. The purpose of this form is for water right holders and claimants to certify that they have and will continue to take actions needed to comply with the August 20th order, including monitoring their curtailment status. This is a different form than the water unavailability certification form posted in response to the June 15th notices of water unavailability. You must complete the compliance certification form by September 3rd, even if you completed the previous certification form in June. The Human Health and Safety Form. So the Human Health and Safety Certification Form is for all diverters who seek an exception to curtailment for minimum human health and safety needs, as defined in Emergency Regulation Section 877.1, Subdivision G. These diverters must complete the Human Health and Safety Certification Form on the survey portal by September 10th, 2021. If your water right or claim is not currently curtailed, but diversions will be needed to support minimum human health and safety needs, you should complete the Human Health and Safety Certification Form before the September 10th deadline. The Non-Consumptive Use Certification Form. This certification form is for diverters who seek an exception to curtailment for a non-consumptive use as described in the emergency regulation at Section 878. These forms must be completed by September 10th. If your water right or claim is not currently curtailed, but diversions are non-consumptive and do not decrease downstream flows, you should complete the non-consumptive use certification form before the September 10th deadline. Finally, we've got the enhanced reporting of prior diversions and projected demand form. So all diverters with a face value or reported diversions in 2018 or 19 of 5,000 acre feet or greater are required to submit the enhanced reporting of prior diversions and projected demand form in the survey portal by September 10th and monthly thereafter. This form asks for information on prior diversions and projected demand to inform water demand estimates and the curtailment process in the Delta Watershed. An overview of the Compliance Certification Form, Human Health and Safety Certification Form, and Non-Consumptive Use Certification Form will be provided later this morning. An overview of the enhanced reporting of prior diversions and projected demand form will be provided this afternoon. Tutorials for all of these forms will also be posted on the State Water Board's website, along with this webinar presentation. In addition to the forms I've outlined, the emergency regulation and August 20th order provide for the submission of the following proposals, agreements, or petitions. 1, proposals to correct water right priority. These are due within 14 days of receipt of the August 20th order. 2, proposals that curtailment is inappropriate. These are also due within 14 days of receipt of the order. 3, alternative water sharing agreements. These can be submitted whenever the regulation is in effect. And 4, petitions to increase human health and safety diversions when human health and safety needs require more than 55 gallons per person per day or cannot be quantified on the basis of gallons per person per day. And these are due by September 10th. In addition, petitions for reconsideration of the curtailment order under provisions in the Water Code can also be submitted by September 20th. Any proposals, agreements, or petitions should be sent to the bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov email address. I will now hand it over to my colleague, Alyssa Campbell.
Thanks, Riley. My name is Alyssa Campbell, and I am an environmental scientist in the Division of Water Rights. In these next two slides, I'm going to be walking through this compliance assistance flowchart that shows the various steps to completing the forms Riley just described. The first step all water right holders and claimants in the Delta Watershed should do after receiving and reading through the August 20th order is to check the curtailment status of each of their water rights or claims. To do this, you need to check the Delta Watershed Curtailment Status List on the Delta Drought webpage. My colleague, Jesse Jankowski, will provide a tutorial on how to use the Curtailment Status List later in this presentation. If your water right or claim shows as currently being curtailed on the Curtailment Status List, then you must stop all diversions under that water right or claim unless an approved exception to curtailment applies or your curtailment status changes. The August 20th order requires that all water right holders and claimants in the Delta Watershed monitor the curtailment status of their rights and claims by either checking the Delta Drought webpage frequently or signing up for the Delta Drought email list. All water right holders and claimants must submit the compliance certification form, which requires water users to certify that they will either check the website or sign up for the email list to stay informed of changes to curtailment orders. The bottom left of this flow chart shows the additional reporting required for diversions of 5,000 acre-feet or greater annually. Those diverters are required to submit an enhanced reporting form by the 10th day of every month, beginning in September. The enhanced reporting requirements will be discussed in more detail later during the afternoon session. After completing the required forms, diverters can submit additional forms and information if they believe that an exception to curtailment applies to them. We'll cover the steps to take when requesting exceptions in the next slide. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with the first two exceptions to curtailment shown on the left side of this flowchart. As discussed previously, an exception to curtailment may be authorized if the water right or claim is used only for a non-consumptive use, that is, all water is returned to the stream, or water diverted under the water right or claim is the diverter's only source of water and it is needed for minimum human health and safety needs. If you wish to seek an exception for either purpose, you must submit either the Human Health and Safety Certification Form or the Non-Consumptive Use Certification Form using the State Water Board's online survey portal. Many diversions for minimum human health and safety needs and non-consumptive uses may continue after the appropriate form has been submitted, as described in the emergency regulation. However, the State Water Board may request that you submit additional supporting information if necessary. The Human Health and Safety Certification Form also describes the process for submitting a petition to increase human health and safety diversions for those who seek to divert more than 55 gallons per person per day, or those whose diversions for minimum human health and safety cannot be quantified on the basis of an amount per person per day. These petitions require review and approval before increased diversions may continue. So as mentioned previously, the emergency regulation also provides other mechanisms to show that an exception to curtailment may be appropriate. Water users may propose alternative water sharing agreements that would achieve the purposes of curtailment and may submit those via email at any time. Alternative water sharing agreements may not be implemented unless potentially affected water right holders and claimants, including but not limited to the Department of Water Resources and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, concur with the proposal and no objections are submitted to the Deputy Director, or the agreement has been approved by the Deputy Director. Water users may also submit additional information that demonstrates curtailment may not be appropriate. Those submittals require approval before diversions under the curtailed water right or claim may continue. Exceptions to curtailment will be discussed in more detail later on in the presentation. Before we move on, as a quick reminder, if you have any questions so far, please submit them using the chat box in Zoom or send them to the bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov email address. I will now turn the presentation over to Jesse Jankowski.
Thank you, Alyssa. My name is Jesse Jankowski, and I'm a water resource control engineer in the Division of Water Rights. In the next few slides, I'll show how to check the curtailment status of water rights or claims in the Delta Watershed using the curtailment status list. The list is available on the State Water Board's Delta Drought website, waterboards.ca.gov/drought/delta. I just put that link in the Zoom chat for this webinar. Next slide, please. Scroll down on that web page to reach the list tool. Please read the text at the top carefully, as it explains that the curtailment status list serves as a water right curtailment order. The text also gives a general description of watersheds where curtailments are in effect for the remainder of August, which Riley described earlier. Changes to water supply and demand patterns are expected in September, including increased supplies in the Sacramento River Valley, so curtailment statuses will change for some diverters starting tomorrow. Next slide, please. Thank you. Further down the page is the interactive curtailment status list, which you can see here. Note the date up top that the list was last updated. It will continue to be updated weekly and more frequently if there are changes in precipitation and runoff. Please subscribe to the Delta Drought email list. There's a direct form on the website that I mentioned at the bottom, because we will send any notifications of changes to curtailment statuses to all members of that list. However, you will always use this page to check if a particular right or claim's curtailment status has changed. You can scroll through the list to view individual water right IDs there along the left, their owners, their associated priority dates based on State Water Board records, and their curtailment statuses in August and September 2021. Future updates to the status list will include statuses in October and subsequent months. You can also use those little AZ icons at the top of each column to sort them alphabetically. A curtailment status in red, so that's those two columns along the right, one for each month, means that a water right or claim is curtailed during the specified time period, and water may not be diverted unless an exception applies. A status in green means the identified water right or claim is not curtailed during the specified time period. However, this is not an authorization to divert if water right terms or other conditions apply which may affect your authorization to divert. Next slide, please. Thanks. There are multiple ways to search the curtailment list using the search boxes at the top that I've circled in red. You can search by specific water right ID, owner name, water right type, the sub-watershed where it diverts, or you can show only rights located inside or outside of the legal delta. Your water right ID is specified in the first paragraph of the initial order that was physically mailed to you on August 20th. It usually starts with a letter such as A or S, followed by 6 numbers. Here you can see the various options under each of the drop-down menus. To see a specific category of water right type or sub-watershed, click the drop-down, uncheck the all box, and then make your selections. The curtailment status list will automatically update. It might take just a couple seconds for it to think. And at any time, you can clear multiple filters or search results all at once by clicking that reset button that I've circled here, which is in the bottom right of the tool. For more detailed instructions, please watch the Delta Watershed Curtailment Status List tutorial video, which will be posted on the Delta Drought website. Again, that's waterboards.ca.gov/drought/delta. That link is in the Zoom chat for this webinar. And that video will be posted on the website soon. Moving to the next slide now, I will turn the presentation over to my colleague, Mara Irby. Thanks.
Thank you, Jesse. My name is Mara Irby. I'm an environmental scientist in the Division of Water Rights. I will be walking us through completion of the compliance certification form, which is required to be completed for each water right and claim in the Delta Watershed, irrespective of the current curtailment status or season of diversion for the water right or claim by this Friday, September 3rd. By completing the compliance certification form, right holders and claimants certify under penalty of perjury that they have taken or will take actions to comply with the provisions outlined in the order. This includes that they will monitor the curtailment status of their water right or claim, either by subscribing to the Delta Drought email subscription list or frequently checking the Delta Watershed curtailment status list maintained on the Delta Drought webpage, as Jesse just demonstrated. This form is submitted via the State Water Board's Water Rights Form and Survey Submittal portal at https://public.waterboards.ca.gov. I will now share my screen to walk us through the form. So this is the webpage I just listed, except this is the test environment, so it may look slightly different. This portal is used to submit this form and other forms we'll be discussing today. To get started, click Login here at the bottom of the page. Here you are asked for your login and password. You can find this information on the third page of the August 20 order. Keep in mind that every water right or claim has separate login credentials, and you must submit an individual compliance certification form for each of your water rights or claims using their respective login credentials. If you need assistance obtaining your login information, you can contact division staff at bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov or 916-319-0960. That contact information is also provided in the order and on the Delta Drought webpage. Let me just put in a test login here. You will, of course, enter your own. If this is the first time you're logging into our survey portal, you will see this page, which asks that you provide an email address to be associated with your right or claim. Then click Continue. And this takes you to our water user dashboard. This contains a list of the forms that are available for this water right or claim. We are currently walking through the Delta Watershed compliance certification form. So to begin, we click Survey next to that form title. This page explains the purpose of this form. In addition to ensuring compliance with any curtailment orders that may be issued for the right or claim, this page describes that water right holders, claimants, or agents of record for those rights are responsible for immediately providing notice of the August 20th order to all diverters exercising the water right or claim covered by the order. This means, for example, if you lease your property to someone who is exercising your water right, you must immediately make them aware of the August 20th order and its requirements. Once you've reviewed that page, click Next. This page explains the curtailment notification process I mentioned a moment ago and Jesse demonstrated. If you have not already, you can subscribe to the Delta Drought email list at the webpage linked here. We'll just jump to this page. For those of you that may not have subscribed yet, this is our email subscription list page. To subscribe to the Delta Drought list, you scroll down to Water Rights, open up the drop-down menu, select Delta Drought, and then return to the top of the page, enter your email address, your full name, and click Subscribe. After doing so, You'll receive an email containing a link that confirming that you would like to subscribe. You must click the link provided in the email or send a message to the email address listed in that email in order to complete your subscription. If you do not take one of these actions to complete your subscription, you will not be successfully added to the list. So returning to the form, we click Next to move to the first data entry page. So each statement on this acknowledgement and certification page that has an asterisk is a required field. Clicking this first radio button certifies that you will remain informed of the curtailment status of your water right or claim by subscribing to the email list or checking the online curtailment status list at least weekly. By clicking this button, you also acknowledge that failure to comply with the order is not excused by failure to subscribe to the Delta Drought email list or check the online curtailment status list on the Delta Drought webpage. Clicking the second radio button certifies that you have provided notice of the order to all parties diverting water under this water right or claim, as I mentioned a moment ago. Clicking the third radio button certifies that you will immediately cease diversion under this right or claim in the event that it is curtailed, unless you qualify for one of the exceptions listed below. In order to receive one of these exceptions, you must complete the applicable exception certification form, also available within the survey portal, or submit an applicable proposal or petition via email as discussed previously. So in this example, I'm not selecting any of those forms, but if they did apply, you would check one of those boxes. So click Next to move to the next page. This page requires you to indicate if you have an alternative source of water that you can use to serve the place of use associated with your water right or claim. For example, you may have a reservoir in which you stored water last winter that you are able to draw from in place of this right if it is curtailed. If this is the case, you would select the first option, previously stored water. Other options are groundwater, contracted water, such as if you have a water delivery contract or another right with another right holder or claimant, hauled water, other, and none. You should select all options that are alternative sources of water to this right or claim. If you select other, please provide additional information regarding that source or sources in the box below. After doing so, click Next. This is the last page of the form. On this page, you must sign the form by entering your name in the field provided. Note your relationship to the legal right holder or claimant. I will select other and submit your contact information. And lastly, you must check the box to certify under penalty of perjury that all information entered into the form is true and correct to the best of your knowledge. This box here. And after doing so, click Finish and Submit at the bottom of the page to save and submit your compliance certification form. After clicking Submit, you will be taken to the summary of the form that we just completed. To save or print for your records, scroll to the bottom and select Show as PDF, and then select your desired action. If you return to the survey portal's water user dashboard using the link at the bottom of the summary page, you can return to the summary page for any completed form by clicking Summary next to the appropriate form. To modify a form you have completed, click Survey again to re-enter the form. You will only have access to make changes to the form in the survey portal if the deadline has not yet passed or you have not yet submitted the form. If you would like to make a correction to your form after the September 3rd deadline, please email staff at bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov with the correction.
You may also call the Delta Drop fault line at 916-319-0960 for assistance. I'll stop my share. If we could return to the presentation and go to the next slide. Thank you. Next, I'll talk about the curtailment exception form for minimum human health and safety needs. Minimum human health and safety needs are defined in section 877.1 of the emergency regulation, which we went over in the presentation. Diverters who meet the criteria of the emergency regulation may continue to divert up to 55 gallons per person per day after completing a human health and safety exception form without further approval from the Deputy Director of the Division of Water Rights. If a diversion for minimum human health and safety needs requires more than 55 gallons per person per day or cannot be quantified on the basis of an amount per person per day, an approval from the Deputy Director is required before the diverter may divert above this threshold. If you wish to seek an exception to curtailment to meet minimum human health and safety needs now or in the future, you must submit your request by September 10th, regardless of the current curtailment status of this right. If you do not plan to request a human health and safety exception, you should not submit this form. To request this exception, you must complete the Delta Watershed Human Health and Safety Certification form, which is also available on the board's water rights forms and survey submittal portal. Like the compliance certification form, this form must be completed for each of the rights or claims for which you are seeking an exception to curtailment for minimum human health and safety needs. I will now walk us through completion of this form. So we are back after having logged in. You would follow the same procedure I showed a moment ago to reach this screen using the information provided on the August 20th order. To begin this form, you would click Survey next to the Human Health and Safety Certification form title. The first page of the survey is informational. It describes the circumstances under which diverters should submit this form and reminds diverters of the September 10th deadline to certify their need for human health and safety exception should their water right or claim be curtailed now or in the future. Click Next to proceed with this form. This page asks diverters to select whether their minimum human health and safety needs after exhaustion of all other alternative sources of water can be met by 55 gallons per person per day or less. If so, select the first radio button. This acts as an acknowledgement and certification that these needs meet the definition of human health and safety needs provided in the regulation, and that alternative sources of water will be used prior to diverting under this right using this exception in the event the right or claim is curtailed. If your minimum human health and safety needs after exhausting alternative sources of water would exceed 55 gallons per person per day, or you are unable to quantify gallons per person per day, such as due to an unknown population size served by your right or claim, select the second radio button. By doing so, you acknowledge that in order to receive this exception, you must submit a petition demonstrating compliance with the requirements of the regulation and receive approval of the Deputy Director. This next radio button is required. Clicking this button certifies that the diverter and all end users of the diverted water under this exception are operating under the strictest existing conservation plan for its place of use, or shall be operating under the strictest existing conservation plan within 30 days of filing this certification. If additional approvals are required before the strictest existing conservation plan can be implemented, you must certify that all possible steps will be taken to ensure prompt approval. If you need to provide additional information for consideration, you may submit that via email to bay-delta at waterboards.ca.gov. The next checkbox is for diverters who are distributors of a public water supply, such as those that supply water to residences. These diverters must select this box to certify that they have declared a water shortage emergency condition and either already have adopted regulations and restrictions on the delivery of water or will adopt them within a time frame specified by the Deputy Director. The next radio button is also required and certifies that you have pursued steps to acquire other sources of water, but have not been completely successful, or you will be pursuing steps to identify and secure other sources of water. In the text box below, you must explain the steps you have taken or plan to take to meet the requirement to pursue other water sources. So check that or click that and insert your text there. Lastly, on this page, if the right holder or claimant is a public water system, enter the public water system identification number in this box. Then click Next to move to the next page of the form. This page only applies to those who selected the second radio button on the previous page, indicating that they seek to divert more than 55 gallons per person per day for minimum human health and safety needs, or that diversions cannot be quantified on the basis of gallons per person per day. If this does not apply to you, meaning you clicked the first radio button on the previous page, please skip this page. If this does apply to you, please review this information carefully. Near the top of the page, it describes the information that you must include in your petition to receive a human health and safety exception for greater than 55 gallons per person per day, and subsequently, the information required for those that are unable to quantify the amount for the population their water right or claim serves. If you fit the first category, your petition must describe the specific circumstances that make the requested diversion amount necessary to meet minimum human health and safety needs, and list the health and safety needs to be met by the diversion. Estimate the amount of water needed, clearly indicating the unit, rate, volume, and time step. Certify that the supply will be used only for the stated need. Describe any other additional steps that the diverter will take to reduce diversions and consumption. Provide the time frame in which the diverter expects to reduce usage to no more than 55 gallons per person per day, or why minimum human health and safety needs will continue to require more water. And as necessary, provide information or provide documentation that the use meets the definition of minimum human health and safety needs provided in subdivision G of section 877.1 of the emergency regulation. Approval of your petition may be conditioned on implementation of additional conservation measures and reporting requirements. If you fit the second category regarding diversions that cannot be quantified on the basis of gallons per person per day, your petition must demonstrate that the requested continuation of diversion under the otherwise curtailed water right is in furtherance of the constitutional policy that the water resources of the state be put to beneficial use to the full extent that they are capable, and that waste and unreasonable use be prevented, notwithstanding the effect of the diversion on senior water rights or in-stream beneficial uses. Approval of these petitions may also be conditioned as appropriate to ensure that the diversion and use are reasonable and in the public interest. Any applicable petition accompanying your exception request should be sent to a-delta@waterboards.ca.gov by September 10th with the subject line, petition for increase to human health and safety diversions for water right ID, and then insert your ID there. Check the box at the bottom of the page to certify that you have or will be submitting a petition to meet these requirements. So again, if you selected that second radio button on the previous page, you should select this checkbox. But if you didn't, like I didn't in this example, I won't check it. And I'll just click next to proceed to the last page of the form. This again is where you must sign the form. Note your relationship to the legal water right holder or claimant. submit phone and email contact information, as well as certify under penalty of perjury that all information entered into this form is true and correct to the best of your knowledge. After doing so, you would again click the Finish and Submit button at the bottom of the page to save and submit your Human Health and Safety Certification form. Like the Compliance Certification form, after doing that, you would be taken to a summary of this page, and you could return to the dashboard like I showed. Click Summary again to re-enter that page, possibly save as a PDF or print, or re-enter the form using the Survey button. If we could return to the presentation and go to the next slide. I will turn the presentation over to my colleague Riley Nolan to describe the Non-Consumptive Use Certification form.
Thanks, Mara. I will hand it over to Cayenne to play the Non-Consumptive Use Certification form tutorial.
Hello, my name is Riley Nolan. I'm a Water Resource Control Engineer with the State Water Resources Control Board's Division of Water Rights. Today, I'm going to show you how to complete the Delta Watershed Non-Consumptive Use Certification form to continue diverting for non-consumptive use in the event your water right or claim is curtailed. The Delta Watershed Non-Consumptive Use Certification form is submitted via the State Water Board's Water Rights Form and Survey Submittal portal at public.waterboards.ca.gov. You can find your login information for the survey portal on the third page of the initial order imposing water right curtailment and reporting requirements, which was physically mailed to all diverters in the Delta Watershed on August 20th, 2021. Keep in mind that every water right or claim has individual login credentials, and you must submit a non-consumptive use certification form for each of the rights or claims for which you are seeking an exception to curtailment for non-consumptive use. The Emergency Reporting and Curtailment Regulation that went into effect on August 19th, 2021, outlines a process by which right holders and claimants in the Delta Watershed can certify that their diversions are for a non-consumptive use that does not decrease downstream flows. Section 878 of the Emergency Regulation describes the non-consumptive uses in the Delta Watershed that are eligible for this exception to curtailment. These include direct diversions solely for hydropower if discharges are returned to the source stream or its tributaries and water is not held in storage, direct diversions dedicated to in-stream uses for the benefit of fish and wildlife pursuant to Water Code Section 1707, including those that divert water to a different location for subsequent release, provided the location of release is hydraulically connected to the source stream, direct diversions located within the legal delta that are used exclusively to irrigate lands entirely below sea level when a comparison of diversion and drainage records provides substantial evidence that continued irrigation of those lands does not increase net channel depletions, and other direct diversions solely for non-consumptive uses that do not decrease downstream flows in the watershed. If your water right or claim is curtailed, or if your right or claim is not curtailed right now, but you would like to continue diverting for a non-consumptive use in the event it were to be curtailed in the future, you must complete the Delta Watershed Non-Consumptive Use Certification form by September 10th, 2021. This tutorial is being recorded within our test environment using a revoked water right for the purpose of providing an example. All water rights and claims that received the August 20th order have access to the Delta Watershed Non-Consumptive Use Certification form. Click on Survey to start the form. The first page of the survey is informational. It describes the circumstances under which diverters should submit this form and reminds diverters of the September 10th deadline to certify their non-consumptive use under all applicable rights or claims. The next page of the non-consumptive use certification form asks the diverter to acknowledge and certify that their non-consumptive use falls under one or more of the categories described in Regulation Section 878. The diverter must certify to one or more of the following statements. Statement 1. In the event this water right or claim is curtailed, all direct diversions of water during the period of curtailment will be solely for hydroelectric power generation. Promptly following diversion for that purpose, discharges will be returned to the surface water source and not held in storage. Statement 2. This water right or claim is dedicated to in-stream uses for the benefit of fish and wildlife pursuant to Water Code Section 1707, including diversions to a different location for release, provided that the location of release is hydraulically connected to the source stream. Statement 3. 1. All points of diversion are located within the legal delta. 2. In the event this water right or claim is curtailed, direct diversions of water will be used exclusively to irrigate lands entirely below sea level. And 3. A comparison of diversion and drainage records provides substantial evidence that continued irrigation of those lands does not increase net channel depletions. I understand that I may be asked to provide additional evidence to support my assertion that continued irrigation of the subject land does not increase net channel depletions. Statement 4. In the event this water right or claim is curtailed, any direct diversions of water during the period of curtailment will be solely for non-consumptive uses not described above, and such direct diversions will not decrease downstream flows in the watershed. Again, the diverter must certify that one or more of the statements on this page applies to the diversions made pursuant to their water right or claim. This page asks for the diverter to provide an explanation and evidence that supports the assertion that continued diversions are non-consumptive and do not decrease downstream flows. On the last page of the form, you must enter the name of the person signing, the relationship of the person signing to the legal right holder or claimant, an explanation of the relationship to the legal right holder or claimant if necessary, a contact phone number, and a contact email address. On this page, you must also certify under penalty of perjury that all information submitted in the form is true and correct to the best of your knowledge. Click the Finish and Submit button to save and submit your non-consumptive use certification form. At this point, the non-consumptive diversion and use under this water right or claim may continue without further approval from the Deputy Director for the Division of Water Rights in the event the water right or claim is curtailed. However, additional information may be requested in the future if needed to verify or elaborate on information provided in the form.
Thank you. I will now hand it over to Jenilyn Guzman for our Q&A session, but I believe we're taking a 5-minute break before then. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Riley. Yeah, so before we move into our question and answer session, why don't we take, initially we're thinking 5 minutes, but why don't we take a 10-minute break? And yeah, we'll resume at around 10:24. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box located at the bottom of your screen if you're joining us through Zoom. If you're calling in or watching the webcast, you can email your question in to bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov using the subject line 831 webinar question. So thanks, and we'll see you back at 10:24. Okay, hello everyone, welcome back. We will now move on to our question and answer session. And we're still receiving questions, which is quite okay. So if during this Q&A session, if you have any questions, feel free to continue typing them into the Zoom chat found at the bottom of your screen, or if you're calling in or watching the webinar, email them to bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov using the subject line 831 webinar question. So just a note to help streamline the questions that we're receiving, we may be consolidating similar questions together. So if you don't hear your question asked verbatim, that could be it. Additionally, we will not be addressing questions that are circumstance specific at this time. If you do have one of those specific questions, please email them to bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov or give us a call at 916 3090960. Okay, with that, I will jump into our first question. Where can I find the certification that is required to be submitted by September 3rd? And where is this form?
I can take that question. So where can I find the certification that is required to be submitted by September 3rd? So that's the compliance certification form, and it can be accessed at public.waterboards.ca.gov. You should log in using the credentials on the third page of the transmittal letter that accompanied the August 20th order for each of the water rights or claims for which an order was received. And the form will just be located on the water user dashboard of that portal after you log in.
Thank you, Riley. Our next question is, do the letters from June 15th require reporting action?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the notices of water unavailability that were sent in on June 15th requested that users complete what was called the Delta Watershed Water Unavailability Certification Form. That form was not mandatory, it was not required, and it is now closed. So the period to submit that form is closed. All diverters in the watershed that received an August 20th order that was issued under the emergency regulation are required to fill out the compliance certification form. So that is different from the forms required under the notice of water unavailability, and it should be submitted by September 3rd on the survey portal at public.waterboards.ca.gov using the login credentials on the third page of that transmittal letter. So yes, the June 15th letters did not require reporting action. We requested it, but the orders that were issued in August do require reporting action.
Yeah, thanks again, Riley. Our next question is, what happens to those that do not have access to the computer?
So the forms are accessible on other electronic devices, such as tablets or smartphones. We also encourage water users to visit local libraries if that's something that's available to them, to use the computers there. And then additionally, water users can rely on friends and family to act as their agent to fill out the form on their behalf.
Great, thank you, Alyssa. Our next question is, where is the curtailment status list? I'm unable to locate it on the website.
Yes, so the curtailment status list is at waterboards.ca.gov/drought/delta, and I will paste that link in the chat once again.
Great, thanks, Jesse. I'll ask you to stay on to answer the next question, which is, how frequently will the curtailment list be adjusted?
Yes, the curtailment status list will be adjusted on a weekly basis. Right now, that has been every Friday. And you'll note that the date in red up top will change whenever that list is updated. And it may be adjusted even more frequently as conditions change, such as with precipitation or anticipated changes in demands. Any changes to that list will be sent out to the Delta Drought email list. You can subscribe to that on the Delta Drought website that I mentioned earlier. And we will again send out an email notifying everybody on that list whenever that curtailment status list has been updated.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Our next question is, can you define legal delta?
Yes, so the legal delta is a very specific portion of the Delta Watershed that is furthest downstream on the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. It was established under the Delta Protection Act and defined in Section 12-220 of the California Water Code. It stretches roughly from West Sacramento in the north down to Vernalis in the south and Pittsburgh in the west. If you Google legal delta map, you can find an interactive map of the legal delta from the Department of Water Resources, and I will paste the link to that map in the Zoom chat.
Thanks again, Jesse. Our next question is, how should a water user coordinate the submission of additional information regarding certain water rights with the September 3rd certification deadline?
I can take that question. So in regards to coordinating the submission of additional information with the September 3rd certification form deadline. So all diverters in the Delta Watershed must complete the compliance certification form by September 3rd on the water rights forms and survey submittal portal. If you need to submit a human health and safety or non-consumptive use certification form, that should also be submitted by September 10th in the portal. And if you have another submission of additional information that is submitted outside of one of those forms we've discussed, it should be sent to the bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov email address, along with the following timelines. So proposals to correct water right priority should be submitted within 14 days of the receipt of the order, the August 20th order. Proposals that curtailment is inappropriate should be submitted within 14 days of receipt of the order. An alternative water sharing agreement can be submitted at any time the regulation is in effect. Petitions to increase human health and safety diversions, so that's if you already submitted the human health and safety certification form, but your human health and safety need requires more than 55 gallons per person per day or cannot be quantified in gallons per person per day. Those petitions should be submitted via email to the bay-delta inbox, bay-delta inbox by September 10th. And petitions for reconsideration should be submitted again to the bay-delta inbox by September 20th. So that is how you would coordinate the submission of additional information with the compliance certification form deadline of September 3rd.
Great, thank you, Riley. Our next question is, do the certifications that we submitted from the August 20th, 2021 letter constitute the certification to the Deputy Director for Human Health and Safety, or is there some other certification that we need to submit to the Deputy Director?
I can take this one. I walked us through completing the compliance certification form, and one of the questions there had 3 checkboxes where you could indicate if you have or intend to submit an exception form for human health and safety or non-consumptive use, or if you plan to propose an alternative water sharing agreement. But checking those boxes doesn't constitute that request or proposal. That's just informational. So once you've completed the compliance certification form or prior, but certainly be aware of our deadlines. I would complete the compliance one first. Then go ahead, and if you're applying for human health and safety and a human health and safety exception or non-consumptive use, you would use the forms in the portal. I walked us through the human health and safety one, and Riley demonstrated non-consumptive use. So you would complete that form, potentially provide additional information to the Deputy Director via email, and that's bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov, which is on the slide there. So for example, if you need more than 55 gallons per person per day for human health, you'll need to submit that additional petition. So that would go to that email address. And similarly, if you're proposing an alternative water sharing agreement, you would submit that via email as well to this same address.
Thank you, Mara. Our next question is a little long, so I'm going to read it slowly, so bear with me, please. So I think there's a couple of parts. So the first part is, how do you file an exception to the curtailment for a diversion that is disconnected and curtailment would not make water available to any downstream users? Do you file this under non-consumptive uses, even though it applies more to section 876.1? And the second part is, how do you file an exception for a curtailment notice for a stockwater pond? These stockwater ponds are simple ponds that only store rainwater with small earthen dams. These stockwater ponds are currently dry and will remain dry until the next significant rain event.
So I can take the first part of that question with regards to submitting information when you believe that your diversion or stream system is hydraulically disconnected from the rest of the watershed. So you should submit a proposal that curtailment is inappropriate and send that to the bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov email inbox within 14 days of receipt of the August 20th order. Please include supporting information for your assertion that curtailment would be inappropriate because of hydraulic discontinuity, and that proposal will be reviewed by technical staff, and the deputy director will be briefed and a decision will be made. So again, please submit that information under a proposal that curtailment is inappropriate to the bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov email inbox. I'll hand it over to Diane Riddle to answer the question about stock ponds.
Thanks, Riley. The question about stock ponds, I think, really depends upon your specific circumstances. This might be a case in which calling our phone line might be appropriate, but there are a couple of different types of exceptions that could possibly apply. One is the one that Riley just spoke about. It may be if you've got a stock pond that collects water, and that water is disconnected from a stream system, that you could qualify for an exception under that exception category. Also, if the stock pond is used for the health and safety purposes that are identified in the regulation, then you may qualify. However, pure stock pond watering does not qualify for an exception. However, as part of the curtailment order process, the board is not expecting that water users would modify a reservoir structure. If you have an outlet pipe and you don't qualify for an exception, then you should be bypassing inflow into the stock pond. If you qualify for an exception, that exception would apply. But I think you'd have to look at your specific circumstances. We're happy to walk through those issues with you in more detail.
Great, thank you both Diane and Riley for responding to that question. Our next question is, could you please clarify the criteria by which enhanced reporting requirements are determined? The speaker said that these requirements are triggered if more than 5,000 acre feet were diverted in 2018 or 2019. Our diversions in both of those years were less than 5,000 acre feet. And only in 2020, for the first time and only time, did our diversion surpass 5,000 acre feet.
Yes, so you're correct that the 5,000 acre feet threshold is only for 2018 or 2019 reports. However, if you do own an appropriative water right whose face value, which is the maximum annual diversion amount, is over 5,000 acre feet, that requirement would also apply. The surefire way to know that you are required to conduct the enhanced reporting is that you received a different version of the August 20th curtailment order. Under the response required heading on the 3rd page of the order, it mentions the enhanced reporting. Also, if you log in to the survey portal at public.waterboards.ca.gov, and you do not see the enhanced reporting of actual diversions and projected demand form visible there, you do not have to complete it. So it's only upon logging in when you see that that you are required.
Thank you, Jesse. Our next question is, what if you have a pre-1914 riparian right not yet curtailed that can claim a non-consumptive use, given that if you are curtailed, you will stop using any water for consumptive use, but continue your diversion for hydroelectric and fish and wildlife?
I can take this question. So with regards to your pre-1914 riparian right or riparian claim that is not yet curtailed, you should submit the compliance certification form by September 10th, as you would for any other water right. But if you divert for a non-consumptive use, which it sounds like you may, please submit the non-consumptive use exception form, certification form in the water rights survey and form submittal portal by September 10th, even if the right or claim is not currently curtailed. So please just, again, submit the compliance certification form by September 3rd and the non-consumptive use certification form by September 10th.
Thank you, Riley. Our next question is, if a water user received a curtailment notice, but that water user is only using previously stored water, how can that water user respond to the How can that water user respond to the curtailment notice, which should not have been issued?
So I do want to be clear, the orders for curtailment are orders, they are not notices. And it makes it clear in the last paragraph in the findings section of the order that the unavailability determination does not apply to rediversions of previously stored water that are authorized by water right or contract. If you received a curtailment order, you do still have to submit the compliance certification form. However, you should check the alternative sources of water box and select previously stored water as your alternative source of water. Again, these curtailment orders do not affect the rediversion of previously stored water, but you are still required to complete the compliance certification form.
Thank you, Jesse. Our next question is, in the ongoing presentation, it was said that the compliance certification form must be submitted by all water rights and claims in the Delta. Does this apply to all senior water rights holders and other water rights holders, regardless of current curtailment status? Or does it additionally apply to non-senior water rights holders that were curtailed earlier this year? It seems it does not apply to those curtailed earlier this year and that did not receive a personalized copy of the August 20th initial order, since it means that we do not have a login and password for the portal. Just wanted to verify that this understanding is correct.
Okay, so I think I can take this question. So all diverters in the Delta Watershed that received the August 20th order should be completing the compliance certification form by September 3rd. Even if your water right or claim was curtailed under some other mechanism before August 20th, like Term 91 or the cannabis cultivation dry season forbearance period, you should still be submitting the compliance certification form by September 3rd for every water right or claim that received the August 20th order.
Thank you, Riley. Our next question is, where are the blank forms located on the website so the diverters can know what information is needed to complete each form?
Yes, so the forms that are required to be submitted are located online at public.waterboards.ca.gov. And from there, once you log in with the information that is provided on the third page of your curtailment order, there you can view the forms that need to be submitted. Again, the curtailment compliance form is the only one that is required unless you are applying for an exception or you are required to submit the enhanced reporting form. I will put that link to the survey submittal portal. Again, that's public.waterboards.ca.gov in the chat for the Zoom webinar.
Thanks, Jesse. Our next question is, what is considered evidence, or what is an acceptable form of evidence for a curtailment exception?
Sorry about that. I can go ahead and take that one. I think it depends on the circumstances for the exception for which you're applying. I would review the regulation section that applies to the curtailment exception that you're interested in. And generally, it should be substantiation that the criteria are being met. Whatever substantiation you have, the better the substantiation, the more effective that that request for an exception will be. We may follow up if needed for additional information. So I think it will depend upon the circumstances. That is another issue I think we'd be happy to discuss with water users that have specific questions. If you want to call our phone line or email us, we can talk about the specific circumstances of your water right.
Thanks, Diane. Our next question is, apologize. Under section 878.1 Health and Human Safety exception, if a diversion cannot be quantified based on a per person per day basis, what information must be included in a petition?
I can take this one. So according to the regulation and the form, it describes that your petition must demonstrate that the requested continuation of diversion under the otherwise curtailed water right is in furtherance of the constitutional policy that the water resources of the state be put to beneficial use to the full extent that they are capable, and that waste and unreasonable use be prevented, notwithstanding the effect of the diversion on senior water rights or in-stream beneficial uses. To do that, I would recommend that you provide whatever population information you might have. Explain why quantifying that specific population number is difficult for you. What minimum human health and safety needs would be met by the diversion. Any conservation practices that you have in place to avoid waste and unreasonable use of water, and any other applicable information that you might have to support, those requirements. And like Diane just mentioned, if you have specific questions, you could reach out to us to see if perhaps more information is required than you've already compiled. But that's the basic type of information we'd be looking for.
Great, thank you, Mara. And I apologize, I'm having some technical difficulties on my end with our question list. So if I'm pausing in between, I apologize again. So our next question is for a hydroelectric plant that diverts and stores, but the releases from storage exceed the inflow until the spring runoff time, which radio button should we select on the exception certification form? The first radio button addresses hydro but assumes no storage. The fourth option is the catch-all, where the non-consumptive use doesn't reduce downstream water availability. Is that the correct selection for traditional non-run of the river hydro?
This is Diane. I can take this one. As long as you're bypassing at least the quantity of inflow to your reservoir, then that should be considered a non-consumptive use. And you should fill out the forms consistent with the non-consumptive use. If there are more details or more nuance to the situation, then we're happy to discuss those issues with you. And those are also issues that you can denote in the note sections of the various forms. But generally, it's considered a non-consumptive use if you're bypassing at least the quantity of inflow coming into your reservoir.
Great, thank you, Diane. Our next question is, can you provide further Can you provide further explanation on what qualifies as non-consumptive use?
Yeah, I can take this. So as Diane was mentioning, I think probably the most critical aspect of non-consumptive exception is that the diversion use of water does not decrease downstream flows. So, you know, this could apply to direct diversions for hydropower, direct diversions dedicated to in-stream uses for the benefit of fish and wildlife, or other direct diversions solely for non-consumptive uses. There's also the non-consumptive use exception to curtailments may also apply to direct diversions located within the legal delta. And that's if the water is used exclusively to irrigate lands entirely below sea level. And then when comparison of diversion and drainage records provide evidence that continued irrigation of those lands does not increase net channel depletions. And I would say if you have any questions or you require any clarification, please feel free to call the phone line or send an email and we can address specific questions that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Our next question is, we have 3 total water rights and are able to file certifications on 2 of them. The third sends an error message when logging in with the information provided in the State Water Board letter. We have called and emailed the Bay Delta email a few times, but have not received answers as to how to fix this problems. Do you have any suggestions?
Thank you for your question and for conveying your concern about login errors under your third water right. We were made aware of an issue with the portal where a few users were receiving this error message, but it should be resolved by now. So I'd kindly ask that you try logging in one more time. And if you still encounter any issues or login access, just send another email over to the Bay-Delta inbox and we'll follow up with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Riley. Our next question is, when submitting the certification forms, how should we treat or account for water that was previously stored in an upstream reservoir under a different water right and will be rediverted for non-consumptive and possible consumptive uses at a downstream location under a curtailed water right?
Yes, so we'll discuss the enhanced reporting requirements in much more detail this afternoon, but I can tell you now that the releases from storage of previously stored water should be reported in those appropriate fields. There are either releases that are made for downstream use or releases that are abandoned. And so they should be reported under those categories for the underlying right under which the water was stored in the enhanced reporting. You do not have to report rediversions of previously stored water in the enhanced reporting form.
Thanks, Jesse. Our next question is, the forms do not have the option for currently not curtailed water diverters to volunteer curtailment to save the water for others. Also, for those who use diversion for emergency fire suppression, shouldn't that be an expressly stated option?
This is Diane. I can go ahead and take this question. With respect to the first part, we do understand that a number of water users that may not currently be curtailed may be working to develop voluntary water sharing agreements in the event that they are curtailed in the future. It may also be the case that individual users are choosing to limit their water use in order to conserve water, and that's very much appreciated, all of those efforts. In the event that it is a voluntary water sharing agreement, that is something that can be submitted at any time to the Bay Delta at waterboards.ca.gov email. address for consideration. In the event that it's a voluntary conservation measure and you would like that recorded for the record, that is also something that you could submit to the email box, and we will retain that for our records and follow up with you if there are any questions or additional information that we would like to have related to that matter. The other question about the emergency fire suppression, that is something I think will depend very much on the specific circumstances. The water use for emergency fire suppression may look a variety of different ways. I think that's something that we would like the additional form completed for so that we can understand those issues better. That being said, I do want to note that we understand that much of the state is under a state of emergency now. If you as a water user or you as an agent have water right holders that are experiencing an emergency fire situation, that is definitely something that the board will take into consideration and address as part of the timeline submittal deadlines, and something that we are definitely going to be flexible on, and understand that response to fire is the #1 priority, and that is certainly the viewpoint on these curtailment related issues, and we will certainly work with water users to address all of those issues.
Thank you, Diane. Our next question is, when will the tutorials be uploaded to the website?
I can take that question. Thanks. So the tutorials will be posted on the Delta Drought and Curtailment webpage in the next day or two. So that's the waterboards.ca.gov/drought/Delta webpage. They'll be posted under the heading that's called Reporting Requirements and Resources. So make sure to check that. And then just as an additional reminder that the recording of this webinar should be available in that same time frame, a day or two.
Great, thank you, Alyssa. Our next question is, up until what time on September 3rd will the portal be open to submit the compliance form?
Thanks for the question. So you should submit the compliance form by, I guess you could say 11:59 p.m. on September 3rd, so midnight, more or less. If you need to submit the form late, or if you just if you haven't submitted it on time, we will accept late submissions. If you need to make a change to an already submitted form and it's before September 3rd, before the deadline to the form, just go ahead and make it yourself in the portal by opening up the survey again. If you need to make an edit or a change to an already submitted form and it's past the deadline, you should email the Bay-Delta inbox, and we'll help you make that change. But for all intents and purposes, you should complete the form by 11:59 p.m. on September 3rd.
Thanks, Riley. And I think there's a second part to that question. So if we request an exception for human health and safety above 55 gallons per day per person, how soon can we expect to hear back with permission to divert?
So those increases to human health and safety diversions that are submitted to the Bay-Delta inbox will be processed in as timely a manner as possible. We are receiving a lot of these, but you should receive an acknowledgement that it has been received. I'll maybe ask Diane if she'd like to speak to the timeline, expected timeline on these petitions to increase human health and safety diversions, but they are being prioritized, and you should receive an acknowledgement from staff that the petition has been accepted for processing.
Yeah, we are going to process those as quickly as we can. We're prioritizing those in particular, as well as all of the exception requests, and we will be as responsive as we possibly can. If there is a particular issue that you need assistance with, that you would like a response to, we can also address those issues if you provide an email or phone into the phone line, and we can make sure that we're addressing any specific concerns.
Thank you, Riley and Diane. Our next question is, so the Tamarack Cabin Owners Association obtains water from the ground springs from the U.S. forest. The water from the springs during the summer months is not sufficient to reach the headwaters of the Macaulay River, even if no diversion was done. We have 2 large tanks which are full, and all water from the spring goes down the seasonal stream and soaks into the ground. The population of the Tamarack Cabin Owners Association varies depending on the number of the 39 cabins being used. Members come up and use their cabins for a few or several days, and I do not know how many people are up there every day. How do I complete the form for the water diversion, or do I need to petition for an exemption?
This is Diane. I can go ahead and handle this one. It sounds like there are possibly 2 types of exceptions that you may wish to seek. One for a disconnected stream. I think you indicated that even without diversions, the stream system would be disconnected. If you have information to support that claim, then you may wish to submit a disconnected stream certification or disconnected stream request. In addition, it also sounds like you may wish to submit a request for a health and safety exception and an exception to the requirement that health and safety supplies be limited to 55 gallons per person per day, because you're unable to quantify in gallons per person per day how much water will be needed for that purpose. You could qualify for both of those exceptions and submit both of those forms, or one or the other, whichever you think is most applicable for your situation.
Thanks, Diane. Our next question is, what if your direct diversions are primary non-consumptive hydropower generation, but you also have minimum health and safety requirements? How is that reported on, and on which form?
I'm sorry about that. Sorry for the delay there. I had trouble finding my unmute button. When requesting exceptions to curtailment, you can select 2 of the certification forms for an exception to curtailment, so non-consumptive use and human health and safety. You should indicate that on your certification form that's due by September 3rd, that you will be submitting whichever exception certification forms apply to the diversions under your right, and then follow up with those exception certification forms by September 10th.
Thanks, Riley. And I think I'll ask you to hang in there for another question. When requesting the exceptions to curtailment, must the applicant select only one reason for non-consumptive use or for health and safety, or should I submit the exception for all applied to my circumstance? So just to reiterate what you just said.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So yeah, exactly. To reiterate, you should select all that apply and submit the exception forms that apply. So even if it's more than one, you can submit the human health and safety and non-consumptive use exception forms, for example. So again, just submit those 2 exception forms by September 10th, in addition to the compliance certification form that's due by September 3rd.
Thanks again, Riley. So the next question is a few parts, so bear with me, please. Red means curtailed during the specific time period. Does this mean day 1 to day 30 or 31 of the month? In August, curtailment notices came toward the end of the month. This obviously means not all of August was curtailed. Will more precise dates be provided for future curtailments? And I believe this is pertaining to the curtailment list. The second is, should we expect flip-flopping curtailments in the future? For example, August is curtailed, September is not curtailed, October is curtailed, November not curtailed. And the third part is, will you be providing more than a 2-month snapshot for curtailment?
I can take that. So to the first part of that question, yes, if a right is curtailed, shown in red, for the specified time period, that means all days of that month. We understand a lot of these curtailment orders were not received until the end of August. As they say, that means the right is curtailed for the remainder of August. Starting tomorrow, September 1st, the curtailment status for September will apply for the entirety of September, unless it is otherwise updated. So September 1st through 30th. The water unavailability methodology used to determine availability of water and thus curtailments is on a monthly time step. Again, we do plan on updating the curtailment status list every week with current conditions, but those curtailment orders do apply for the entirety of the month that they are specified for. It could happen that we would get the flip-flopping curtailments in the future, such as August curtailed, September not curtailed. Both demands and supplies on those monthly time steps do change each month. So we will be keeping those updated with information on supply and demand, but these conditions could happen as supply and demand conditions change. Finally, more than a 2-month snapshot for curtailments, we will have to assess what data is available. I believe Diane may have some further information on this question.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I just wanted to also note with respect to this question that there may be sub-monthly changes to the curtailment status in response to precipitation events. And so there may be a case in which we have a short duration precipitation event and curtailments would be lifted and reimposed at some point within the month. It will depend upon the conditions, or they're lifted at a midpoint in the month and not reimposed within that month, or a variety of different circumstances. We're going to be tracking conditions and the best available information. I think the goal of the process is to ensure that we are not curtailing users when data indicates that water is available for users. So our intent is to lift curtailments as soon as we have an indication that water supplies are available for diversion, which we would anticipate with storm events is likely going to happen, at periods within months. And so in addition to the monthly projections, we will have these sub-monthly projections, and then as Jesse spoke to, the at least weekly updates, and more often if the hydrologic conditions warrant it.
Thank you, Diane and Jesse. Our next question is, will you go over the measurement method form, and is that required for all users to fill out?
I do apologize for some confusion. The measurement method form may be present for some water users, but that is required by a different regulation. The forms we are talking about on the survey portal all begin with Delta Watershed. So there may be up to 4 of those. These include, as we've discussed, the compliance certification form. The full name is the Delta Watershed Compliance Certification Form, is required for all users. If you see the Delta Watershed Enhanced Reporting form, that is required if you see that. And then the other 2, the Delta Watershed Human Health and Safety Certification and the Delta Watershed Non-Consumptive Use Certification, are only required if you believe you have one of those exemptions. Again, none of the surveys that do not begin with Delta Watershed are covered by this regulation, only those 4.
Yeah, I'll chime in. There are separate reporting requirements under existing regulatory requirements, not under an emergency regulation, for which some compliance activities have been conducted. Follow up for required annual reporting under your water right or claim of right, and those went out in a similar time frame as these curtailment orders. We want to make sure that that's not creating any confusion, so we're happy to help to navigate water users through what's required under each requirement and ensure that you understand, what your obligations are for compliance.
Thank you. Our next question is, my water rights type of use is for irrigation and agriculture. However, some of the diverted water drains with the tide. Do I need to fill out the non-consumptive use form?
This is Diane again. I can go ahead and take that question. So if the water is being diverted for a consumptive use, that all of that water should be accounted for. Return flows, we're not treating as a non-consumptive use. We are accounting for those in our water unavailability methodology, but we're not asking for water users to identify those as non-consumptive uses, because the original use is a consumptive use. All of the reporting should occur under that. We'll get into the details later with the enhanced water use reporting that Jesse will go over to explain that in a little more detail. But in terms of the compliance certification form, if you're diverting water for an agricultural or a municipal purpose, that would be considered in most cases a consumptive use of water, and that compliance process should be accounted for as part of a consumptive use of water.
Thanks, Diane. Our next question is, diversions to storage are accounted for on the most senior permit, a power generation permit, consumption, and some diversion to storage are accounted for on the next senior permit. How should the request for prior diversions be reported?
So diversions to storage have their own separate category in the enhanced reporting form. We're going to talk about that in more detail this afternoon. But if there are diversions to storage occurring for any purpose, those should be reported as diversions to storage, whether that be for hydropower, a non-consumptive use, or a consumptive use. That's all a diversion to storage. If it is a direct diversion for consumptive use, it should be reported as such. But again, a diversion to storage is a diversion to storage regardless of its purpose. There is a separate portion of the form that is releases from storage, either for consumptive or non-consumptive uses. And so those should be reported accordingly, but these should be reported under the right under which they're diverted. And again, we'll discuss that some more this afternoon. So please feel free to give some more specificity in your question at that time.
Great, thanks, Jesse. And I'll ask you to stay on for our next question, which is, if you submit a non-consumptive use certificate, are you still required to submit the Delta Watershed enhanced reporting of actual diversions and projected demand by September 10th and every month after that? The
answer is yes. If you submit a non-consumptive use certification, that means you are going to continue to divert because it is non-consumptive. You still have to report those diversions if you are subject to the enhanced reporting requirements. And again, we will talk about that some more this afternoon. But yes, even if you submit a non-consumptive use certificate, you should report those diversions as non-consumptive diversions in enhanced reporting.
Thanks, Jesse. Our next question is, why do we have to log in individually for each water rights certification form, rather than use the RMS login ID for the water user dashboard that provides access to all of the water rights held by a single entity?
Thank you for your question. So the functionality that you describe is no longer supported on the survey portal. You should be logging into the survey portal using the login credentials associated with each water right or claim for which an order was issued. If you have any questions or concerns about this, please feel free to email the bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov inbox. Thank you.
Thanks, Riley. Our next question is, where can we find the guidance for estimating percentage residential use gallons per capita at 2020, and what does it involve?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and paste the link to that document in the chat. But essentially, it outlines all of the calculations required to quantify your water usage on the basis of gallons per person per day. But as we mentioned previously in the presentation, if your human health and safety diversions are not quantifiable on the basis of gallons per person per day, feel free to submit the petition to increase human health and safety diversions and indicate that you'll be submitting that on your human health and safety certification form in the portal as well. But I'll follow up with the link to that document in the chat right now.
Thanks, Riley. Our next question is, how would the State Water Board quantify water to prevent tree die-off, or alternatively, what information would the State Water Board need to support this as a health and safety need?
I think whatever information you have that can support the connection to the need to maintain those trees to prevent fire risk can be supportive information. Whatever you have, I think, should be submitted. Make the best justification you have, and if we require additional information, we will follow up with you for that information.
Thanks, Diane. Our next question is, there is no enhanced reporting form on my dashboard. However, when I open the compliance certification form, there is text in blue saying that compliance with enhanced reporting is required. I'm still confused about whether or not enhanced reporting applies to us.
Very sorry for that confusion. Again, there are two surefire ways to check if you are subject to the enhanced reporting requirements. I think the best way to do so is to look on the third page of your initial curtailment order that was mailed to you on August 20th. Most water right holders will have an underlined heading saying response required compliance certification form. But if your underlined heading instead reads response required compliance certification form and monthly reporting, then you are subject to that enhanced reporting requirement. Alternatively, if you log into the survey portal at public.waterboards.ca.gov and you see a heading saying Delta Watershed enhanced reporting of prior diversions and projected demand, you are required to fill that out, and you can do so by clicking the survey button. We will walk through how to do so in more depth this afternoon.
Thanks, Jesse. And kind of similarly, someone is wondering, where can I confirm whether or not I am above or below the 5,000 acre-foot threshold? Is there anywhere in the letter that would state this specifically?
Yeah, again, this is roughly in the middle of page 3 of the initial order imposing water right curtailment. And again, if you are subject to enhanced reporting, it will say response required, compliance certification form, and monthly reporting. If you are not subject to enhanced reporting, it will only say response required, compliance certification form. Please feel free to reach out to us at bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov or call our phone line, and we'd be happy to triple check that for you.
Thanks, Jesse. Our next question is, what is the expected response time for questions by email or phone? I sent a question by email a week ago and have not yet received a response.
Thank you for your question. I'm sorry to hear that the response time has been over a week, but please go ahead and resend your your email or phone call, and I'll follow up with the staff monitoring the inbox to make sure that we get you a timely response. But generally, you can expect a response within a maximum of 2 to 3 business days. That's if we're experiencing a surge in calls, but normally it would be within 1 business day or slightly longer.
Thanks, Riley. Our next question is, our water agency holds an agreement with DWR to have DWR obligate furnish water from the State Water Project to meet reasonable and beneficial use on lands within the water agency. Is this an exception to curtailment?
I can go ahead and take that one. If you are taking water under a contract that you have with DWR for previously stored water, and you are not using your water right, then you would indicate so. You have curtailed your use under existing water right, and you are relying upon the contract. I think that's how you would proceed. A lot of these questions, I'll note, are circumstantial specific, and I think some of them will probably require a little more detailed information. We're trying to provide some general answers. This is one that might fall into that category. But generally, if you have a contract with DWR or Reclamation and your underlying water right has been curtailed, then you would be relying upon that contract to supply your water diversion needs and not upon your underlying water right. If it is curtailed, that would generally be the situation.
Thanks, Diane. The next question is, if the diverted water is used for farm irrigation, how is it reported?
If the diverted water is used for farm irrigation, I'm sorry, I'm trying to track the question you're on, but I can go ahead and take that. If you're using water for irrigation purposes, then under your underlying water right, that would be the consumptive use of water under that water right. Again, if you're diverting that water under a contract and you've curtailed use under underlying water right, then you would report accordingly. There may be more to this question. I think I saw this question. I will go ahead and leave it at that. Maybe, Jenilyn, you could identify which question number you're identifying to help us track.
Yeah, it's question 3.9 in our tracking. So I think there was
Okay.
2 entries submitted by this attendee. So I think they're seeking clarification on if stored water from a reservoir is diverted downstream for farm irrigation. Specifically, how would it be reported?
So the question is, if stored water from a reservoir is diverted downstream for non-consumptive use, how is it reported? And then I think the clarification was, if stored water is being used for a consumptive use like farm irrigation, how is that reported? So that I think was stated earlier in the presentation, rediversion of previously stored water, if you have a right to redivert that stored water because it's either you stored the water under your water right and you're rediverting it downstream for use, or your irrigation district did and you have an arrangement with them, then that is not subject to the curtailments. If you have a contract with DWR Reclamation and you're diverting previously stored water under their water rights, that is also not subject to curtailment. However, if there are abandoned flows available, that is potentially subject to curtailment. So, for example, if a hydropower operator is releasing stored water and that water is then abandoned downstream, then that would potentially be subject to curtailment. The water unavailability methodology has an accounting for those abandoned flows, and we've factored that in to our determinations of water unavailability. So unless you have a contract, if your underlying water right has been curtailed, then that would stand as a curtailment. In terms, we can get into how you report diversions when we get into the afternoon session, but just for purposes of clarity on curtailments, if you're diverting under a water right, but you have the right to redivert previously stored water, then it's not subject to the curtailment.
Thank you, Diane. So our next question for staff will be 2.31. Is there any sense of how compliance with the curtailment regulation might affect our future water rights? In a previous draft of the regulation, there was a statement that compliance would not affect water rights in the future, but this statement seems to have been removed from the final regulation.
I could take that question. I think the statement that the commenter is asking about does appear in the final version of the resolution that the board adopted, through which the board adopted the regulation. So this is in resolution number 2021-0028, and it says, except for purposes of enforcement of a curtailment order issued pursuant to this regulation, this regulation and any curtailment order issued hereunder shall not be cited as authority for or evidence of the validity or priority of any water right or claim affected or protected by this regulation. Given this, it would be inappropriate to consider compliance with the regulation to be an admission or waiver of any rights or claims of affected parties. So I think this is probably the statement that the commenter is referring to. You can reach out to us separately if that's not the one, but really, the board was trying to be as clear as possible as to what's going on here in this, drought emergency response as it relates to the overall water rights system. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, David. So our next question is, under the health and safety exemption, what constitutes a lack of alternative supply? Many of our water uses are such that other sources, for example, tributaries or springs, are within the same watershed, or that hauling water is not possible in many cases. Further, groundwater availability is highly questionable due to the hydrogeology or remoteness of the location. Do you have any thoughts? So we want to acknowledge that we received this question and encourage the person that submitted this question to follow up with staff if there's any specifics. The email is bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov, or you could give a call to our phone line at 916-319-0960. So our next question is pertaining to exemption 878.1. Our water rights are from springs that do not have hydraulic connection to downstream flows for a water board memorandum. Do we need to seek alternative water?
Thank you for your question. I would strongly encourage you to submit a proposal that curtailment is inappropriate to the bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov inbox with the memorandum that you referenced in your question and any other supporting information that your diversions are hydraulically disconnected from the rest of the watershed. So again, please follow up with the Bay Delta inbox and we'll direct your proposal to the appropriate technical staff. Thank you.
Thanks, Riley. Our next question is there a way to obtain an exemption for diversion to storage for subsequent hydropower generation to support ISO grid integrity?
That is something that I think we can discuss in more detail. I think it will depend upon the circumstances. So I'd encourage the party submitting this comment to reach out to the board, and this is something that we can further and evaluate facilities and compile that information.
Thanks, Diane. And for staff, I'm going to be reading 3.15. If I sent in a letter by email asking for correction of priority date within 14 days, will I receive a confirmation back of timely receipt? As how long will it take to have the correction considered in a response?
And I'll take that. This was also sent in by the same person asking about expected response times. I just checked with our team monitoring the inbox, and we have not received your proposed correction. So I'll ask you to resend it, please. It would be to that email address on the screen there, bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov. Once we receive it, you will receive a response that we have received your proposed correction. As it relates to timeline for making a determination, that's going to be dependent upon the specifics of the case. But please resend the proposed correction, and when we receive it, you will receive confirmation that we have received it. And if you do not receive confirmation after resending it, please give us a call and we can get this sorted out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. Our next question for staff is question 3.2. What is the process to approve exemptions where required, and how long does that take? And then the second question they have is, what is the process to approve exemptions where required? Same question, just duplicated in our records.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So the standard human health and safety and non-consumptive use certifications, exceptions to curtailment, are more or less pre-approved as long as they are in line with the definition in the regulation and a relevant, the appropriate certification form has been submitted in the portal. These diversions do not require further approval from the deputy director. We will be sure to follow up with the individual diverter if we need additional information. However, you must receive approval from the deputy director for any submissions to the Bay Delta inbox, including petitions to increase human health and safety diversions, those alternative water sharing agreements, proposals that priority is incorrect, petitions for reconsideration, or proposals that curtailment is inappropriate for hydraulic discontinuity, for example. So those all require approval from the deputy director. And in terms of a timeline, we are prioritizing the review of these submissions, especially the increases to human health and safety petitions. And in terms of the process for review, we'll be sure to follow up if we need additional information to support your proposal or submission. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Riley. And I think I might have you stay on for this next question, which is there a chance that the Water Board could extend the deadlines? It seems tough to just now have a webinar for forms due on Friday and then not have tutorials up until 48 hours prior to the deadline.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So if you have any concerns regarding the deadlines associated with these reporting requirements, just please feel free to email the Bay-Delta inbox, that email address that you should see on your screen right now. And I also want to note that we are cognizant and appreciate the impact of wildfire in the state right now. So if you're experiencing or if you're impacted by one of the many wildfires in the state, we are providing additional flexibility for those people. So if you have any concerns about the reporting deadlines for any reason, go ahead and email the Bay-Delta inbox and we'll work with you moving forward. Thanks.
I just wanted to add to that, just to note, I don't know if all of water users have actually logged on to the portal yet. The certification form is relatively simple. It's, it shouldn't take very long to complete. The enhanced reporting form will take additional time that we provided an additional week in order to submit that form. So we would appreciate if water users could submit their forms as soon as possible. It's important for us to understand and track compliance related activities. So if you can at all get those forms in as soon as you can, we'd appreciate that.
Thanks, Diane, and thanks, Riley. Our next question is, if a post-1914 water right in the Delta is not curtailed in September, is it likely that the status will change mid-month or in October?
It is possible that the status could change with any of these weekly or more frequent updates that I described, particularly in October, as we approach a season when precipitation may be occurring. We'll be continually reevaluating curtailments on a very regular basis. So while you can certainly check the curtailment status of your right now, we definitely encourage you to continue checking the curtailment status list whenever it is updated, and also subscribing to the Delta Drought email list so that you receive an email each time that that list is updated, so that you can be most aware of the current curtailment status of your rights for the upcoming months.
Thanks, Jesse. Our next question, I'm going to jump for staff that are preparing to answer questions, jumping to question 3.5, which is drafting water for dust abatement considered an exception for health and safety concerns as required by the California Forest Practice Rules?
I can answer that question to the degree I can give an answer right now. But the best answer is you should reach out to our team individually, just because there are going to be, I think, a number of different types of situations where somebody is going to feel that their diversions are for a health and safety use, a minimum health and safety use. And really, it's a broad spectrum of what those could mean in an individual situation. So I would say, and I think we've identified this a couple of other times already, reach out to the Bay Delta at bay-deltawaterboards.ca.gov email address individually, so we can work with you on that. The simple answer is maybe, and the simplest answer is reach out so we can work with you to figure that out.
Thanks, David. Our next question for staff is 3.13. So when I open the certification compliance form, the first page, the introduction includes the following, and there's a page quotation. But they're wondering, does that indicate that I am required to do enhanced reporting?
I'm very sorry for the confusion. I understand the confusion is around saying that the regulation title is the Enhanced Water Use Reporting and Curtailment of Diversions. All of the orders say that regardless, and I apologize for the confusion, but as I've explained earlier, the best place to look would be on the order that you received in the mail. In the middle of the third page, if it mentions response required, compliance certification form, and monthly reporting, then you are subject to the enhanced reporting requirements. If it does not mention that, it only mentions the compliance certification form, then you are not subject to that. Again, sorry for the confusion, but enhanced water use reporting is part of the name of the regulation.
Thank you for that clarification, Jesse. Our next question for us is number 3.17. And it is, what are the additional allowances for those affected by wildfire to which you just alluded?
I can go ahead and take this question. I think it's generally an issue of enforcement discretion, and I think that applies to a number of the categories that we've talked about today, including the requests for exceptions. Those, generally parties should do everything they can to comply as soon as they can. If you have an extenuating circumstance like a wildfire that you have to contend with, that is certainly something that we will consider, and in terms of looking at compliance related issues with submitting forms on time. And our request is that you get those forms submitted as soon as you can, when it's safe to do so, and you're able to do that. This really comes down to enforcement discretion. For a number of these issues, there are, for some of the categories of information, you can make formal requests for additional time to the deputy director by submitting an email to the Bay Delta at waterboards.ca.gov email address. Otherwise, if it's a little bit of additional time needed for fire response related issues, that is something that we will consider in evaluating compliance with the certification forms. Our real goal with those is to have those submitted so that we can understand the circumstances related to compliance and the issues related with health and safety supplies, and ensure that we are implementing the curtailments effectively and addressing any needs for exceptions. I think that covers it.
Thanks, Diane. Our next question for staff is 2.23. Is there an interactive map of all tributaries of Shasta Delta Watershed?
I can take that. We don't currently have an publicly accessible map to identify where your point of diversion may be located or your water right. That is something that if you have a question about the location of your water right or another water right, that we can address if you submit an email to the email address or phone into the phone line. That's something we can assist you with.
Thanks, Diane. And I think we're approaching the end of the questions that we have received. So if you are in the Zoom or watching the webcast or calling in, this is his last call for any questions that you have. You can type them into the chat at the bottom of the page, or if you're calling in or watching the webcast, you can email bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov using the subject line 831 webinar question. So the last question that we have right now is, in consideration that this webinar and workshop is being conducted 3 days prior to the deadline, and tutorials on completing the compliance form may not be posted online 24 to 48 hours prior to the deadline. Shouldn't the deadline be extended? I submit forms for a farmer who manages properties for multiple landowners with 9 different points of diversion, and it will be difficult to comply with the deadline because of my already existing schedule. Shouldn't an extension to the deadline be granted?
I can go ahead and answer this question. The reason for the quick turnaround on the deadline is, as we talked about earlier in the presentation, we are dealing with extreme water supply shortages, extreme concerns, limited water supplies. So we are asking for as quick a turnaround time on filling out the forms as possible. If you have extenuating circumstances, again, that will be considered in evaluating compliance related issues. At this point, we aren't planning to extend the deadline, but again, we would consider, particularly for water users that have a large number of water rights or other factors, fire, other factors that require additional time. Again, the form is relatively simple if you haven't yet opened it, and our staff are available to answer questions if you've reached out to us and it's taking a little bit of time to get back to you. That's, again, something that we would factor into that determination. Really, our goal is to have you complete the form so that we can understand, what's occurring in terms of water users understanding that they received the orders and determine what additional follow-up action might be needed, either for exceptions that parties may believe apply to them, or if we need to reach out to ensure that water users understand the purpose of the order and their obligations under the order. So we are requesting that we get those forms in by the deadline. If that's not possible, again, the other factors will be considered in terms of compliance. Our real compliance goal is compliance with the curtailment related requirements themselves. The reporting is to help us to understand that set of issues better. So we appreciate as much assistance as we can get from the water user community. We understand and apologize for the short turnaround time on that. There's been an interesting year in terms of water supplies, and we've had conditions, a lot of unexpected conditions that have led to greater shortages than were expected that have required more rapid response than I think we would have liked to provide for everyone.
Thank you, Diane. And we are receiving a good wave of some last minute questions. I'll give some staff some time to think those over. That I will be looking at and reading question 3.20. If in-stream diversion for health and safety is allowed, may the vegetation be cleaned out of the pond to improve access to stored water for firefighting purposes?
I can go ahead and take this one. I think this is definitely a situation where we're going to have an individualized conversation to understand the factors and how that might affect firefighting. So I encourage you to, you may submit the exception form and we can provide more specific information, and we can evaluate that further. But I think this is something we're going to have to take a look at the specific circumstances.
Thank you, Diane. So next I'll be reading question 3.21. Must a diverter who received the curtailment order but has submitted a proposal that curtailment is inappropriate sign the certification by September 3rd? Or can they wait for a determination on their proposal that curtailment is inappropriate?
That is a good question. I think what might be appropriate is to explain when you submit your exception request for curtailment not being appropriate, to explain. I would go ahead and submit the form completed and explain the circumstances as to your understanding of the issues and how you responded in the certification form. So if you can elaborate in your exception request on those issues, then we'll have that for the record and can consider that as part of the record.
Thanks, Diane. So as mentioned, we did receive a good influx of new questions. We have about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to, while staff think about the questions, I want to briefly go over some of the resources that we have available for folks. So again, if you have any questions, either circumstance or water rights specific, or if you want to follow up on anything from this webinar with staff, you can email us at bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov, or you can call our Delta Drought phone line at 916-319-0960. And we strongly encourage you to subscribe to that Delta Drought email list if you haven't already, to receive important information regarding curtailment orders in the watershed. And to sign up, you visit the Delta Drought and Curtailment webpage at waterboards.ca.gov/drought/delta, and provide your email in the email subscription list box, which is at the bottom of the page under the Stay Informed header. Staff will be updating this webpage as well as the water unavailability methodology webpage with current information. So we encourage everyone to visit those sites frequently. And as another reminder, we will be having another webinar today starting at 1 p.m. To go over the enhanced reporting requirements. So we encourage folks, if you're interested, to attend that session, even if it does not apply to you. But however, if you are unable to join, the afternoon session will also be recorded, and the recordings will be posted on the webpage for future reference. So again, that webpage is on the screen, but if you're calling in, it's waterboards.ca.gov/drought/delta. So thanks. Those are the resources available. So I'm going to jump back to finish off the last few questions that we received. So question for us is 3.22. How will lack of response, i.e. non-completion of forms, factor into evolving water availability estimates?
So I think the completion of the forms is going to factor into follow-up actions on compliance. At this point, the completion of the certification forms is, I don't think there's necessarily a direct nexus to the water unavailability analyses, but if there's information there that indicates that additional factors should be considered as part of that water unavailability analysis, we will do so. I think the enhanced reporting information is intended, it's really the information we intend to use to inform additional updates to water unavailability estimates and inform future curtailment issues. So that's really the information that's for that purpose. The compliance certification form, the purpose for that form is as it states, to follow up on compliance, ensure that water users understand their obligations, and to assess whether there are additional needs for health and safety water or exceptions. It is possible that those additional exception requests would inform water unavailability determinations. It will depend upon the nature of those requests and the disposition of those requests, whether they're approved or not, and under what conditions they are approved.
Thanks, Diane. Our next question is, I have 193 certification forms to submit. Will I be able to complete forms over the weekend if I do not finish by midnight on Friday?
We will accept late responses to these forms, but we strongly encourage you to submit them by the deadline, particularly the larger users that have many rights and claims to submit these forms for. We encourage you to follow up with staff at this bay-delta@waterboard's email address if there are further things that we need to understand with respect to your rights.
Great, thanks, Jesse. And the last question that we'll be taking for the day, and I believe it's the last question submitted, is this question is in regards to the minimum health and safety 55 gallons or GPCD. Is the expectation that each customer will receive 55 GCPD? If so, the diversion must be greater than 55, as there are losses during the treatment process, for example, sludge production through the sedimentation process, filter backwash, etc. The smaller the population served, the greater the percentage of losses through the treatment process. A quicker way to ask this would be, can we divert more than 55 GCPD to deliver 55 GCPD?
Yeah, I could give a simple answer to this, if there is a simple answer. The regulation provides that you can continue to divert up to 55 gallons per person per day for the minimum health and safety needs without prior approval. You still need to submit the health and safety form, certification form. But if you need to divert more than 55 gallons per person per day, you need to submit a request to the water board. So I won't say that it will be approved or denied. It depends on the circumstances of the situation, but definitely follow that process for any diversions that you think you'll need for about 55 gallons per person per day.
Thank you, David. And that wraps up our Q&A session for today. I want to say thank you. We appreciate your time and participation in today's webinar. And the resources and contact information is on the slide in front. But just to reiterate, you can email us at bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov. And you can also call the Delta Drought phone line at 916-319-0960 and leave a message, and staff will return your call as soon as possible. The webpage is waterboards.ca.gov/drought/delta. So thank you all for your participation, and thank you to all of the staff that supported this webinar, as well as the presenters and those that answered questions. We will be back at 1 p.m. to go over the enhanced reporting requirements. So we'll see some of you there. Thanks, everyone.